So now we're going to talk some more about globalization and the effects of globalization and some more consequent-like effects of globalization. So a term you need to know is FDI. That's not a word. The words are foreign direct investment, and this term is very important. So it refers to investment to a country, so like Nigeria, by individuals, an individual businessman, an investor, or by a company that is not, its headquarters are not located within that country. So it's like a country from the United Kingdom investing in China. And the reason they do this is to pursue personal interests in the company receiving the investment. So they may be investing money to see that company grow, and they may make a positive return on that investment and financially benefit from it. There's not a lot of specifics you need to know. This is just a term you kind of have to get used to saying and referring to. Foreign direct investment occurs typically between multinational corporations, which are corporations that are present in multiple countries. So it's like in Nigeria and China and United Kingdom and Mexico. If they're present there, it's a multinational corporation. And these can pose challenges to a government's fundamental economic and political ideas in principle, particularly if they have different, like let's say you have investors from the United Kingdom coming into China and investing. They're going to have different ideas about the economy and economic growth and actions compared to those within China. In the UK specifically, we can see foreign ownership of critical infrastructure results in debates over utilities and technology usage from these companies. These are utility and technology companies, and this can raise national security concerns. If you have people from other countries investing in developing technology used in the United Kingdom, they could raise concerns over, hey, is that safe and secure for our country? They have interests in balancing economic openness with a safeguard of national interests, and this does challenge the government's fundamental ideas about sovereignty. Let's talk about China. So in China, the presence of foreign companies raises challenge in balancing economic development with maintaining the government's political principles and control over information. So China is very communist. They're very, very protective over the country. They're protective over the economy and the information. So if foreign companies release certain information, they may not agree with the information that is released. In Nigeria, multinational corporations have facilitated corruption and oil dependency, as oil is a big part of that GDP, and it maintains economic growth within the country. So there's also a cultural side to every economy and globalization. And with globalization, we see a lot of diffusion of culture. So this is particularly Western culture. So, you know, your typical pop culture, your TikTok trends, anything that you see probably on YouTube, Amazon, that sort of stuff. It's not really indigenous culture. And this can promote domestic backlash, as within countries, their culture may diminish or be seen as less prominent, or others may judge it or degrade it. This is just an example of, I guess, of Western culture. No, I guess it is an example of Western culture. So, in Iran, for example, their main investors are China and India, and they hope to limit Western foreign direct investment, to limit this cultural exchange that can interfere with their Islamic influence and dominancy. In Mexico, the president of the 2018 election partly won due to his campaign to pledge privatization, reducing privatization reforms to Pemex. And if you're confused by reading that, reducing privatization means reducing the amount that Pemex is privated, to maintain that national sovereignty over the organization and limit any outside influence. They want the government to control that organization, the Mexican government. In the UK, with increased trade and investment ties with the United States, there's been a very widespread of American cultural elements. And this is particularly music, movies, fast food. McDonald's is always the best example with fast food as well. But artists like Taylor Swift that are from America, they've spread to the United Kingdom. I mean, her Eras tour recently did a ton of shows out in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom. In China, economic reforms have led to judicial reforms, and that's pretty much the extent that you have to know about that. All right, let's talk about the environment and health issues. So, increased economic development can cause environmental issues and consequences, and these can accompany health issues that alienate citizens. So, let's say you're building factories, and those factories use coal, and they output various emissions that can cause air pollution that can harm the respiratory systems of animals and including humans. So in Mexico, we see interest group pluralism. We talked about in the last year how pluralism is increasing in Mexico, and this allows many environmental groups to actively promote their platforms and seek changes to national and local environmental policies to limit pollution and environmental consequences within the country. Now, some of this activism has been met with violence from the opposition, and particularly private companies and drug cartels. Private companies particularly are notable because they're going to be the ones that have to follow certain policies put in place. So if they disagree with certain policies because they may make cost of production increase or their profit decrease, they're not going to want to follow them. And then drug cartels, same thing. If they have to spend more money or make less money, they're certainly not going to agree with that. And they're typically more violent than the private companies. In the United Kingdom, interest group pluralism has allowed many, same thing, environmental groups to seek changes to national and local environmental policies. And then in 2015 in China, a documentary, this is a very interesting little case study here, and a documentary called Under the Dome about air and water pollution received 300 million views within 4 days on a government-approved internet in China. So it was made in China and released in China. And after about 4 days, we received 300 million views, which is still less than 30% of the Chinese population because they have over a billion people. The government of China suppressed and blocked the video, so the people in China couldn't see and be aware of the document's contents and air and water pollution prominence in China. All right, so here's a continuation of those environmental and health issues. So in Nigeria, there have been the rise of environmental groups that have been affiliated with MEND, and most of which deals with oil production and extraction in the Niger River Delta. And they have goals of seeking compensation and environmental reforms due to the environmental consequences of the oil production there, because it hasn't been very pretty. In Russia, we also have environmental activism in the spirit of Russian nationalism kind of coinciding together. And this actually has seen some success to varying degrees in altering government policy regarding the environment. So in 2010, for instance, Russia's government planned construction of a major highway to connect Moscow and St. Petersburg through a large nationally famous forest. And then the activists, they didn't like this because the deforestation would have lost the forest. Yeah. So they protested. They protested the removal of trees by a multinational construction firm. The government did develop an alternative plan in response to these protests, though, to replace parts of the forest that was lost due to deforestation by the construction, which was not originally part of the plan here. So they kind of found a compromise. In Iran, they have some of the world's biggest air polluted cities. There's also prospects of severe water shortages as environmental consequences due to industrialization, particularly. There have been environmental activists, but many have been detained, and one has actually died under suspicious circumstances while they were under government custody. And this one in particular was being accused of using research in an attempt to undermine the regime. So this is a picture of a city in Iran. I'm sure this couple's selfie didn't turn out the way they would hope it would, because it looks like just smog in the city. But this is not a particularly natural phenomenon. Smog is not normal fog. It's a mix of fog and normal air pollutants. It's not a pretty sight. And there's a lot of health problems. It can lead to wildlife loss, lower biodiversity. It can lead to lung and respiratory issues in people as well. And it's not visually appealing either. So let's talk about pressures. So foreign governments can bring about certain pressures, such as treaty reversals, public condemning at the international organizations like the United Nations. The United Nations essentially saying, you're doing something wrong, we're going to humiliate you in front of the board of the UN, as well as they can place economic sanctions and limit travel to those countries that offend them and you don't enact certain policies or don't act a certain way, basically don't follow what they want them to follow. And we've seen this before in previous slides. And this doesn't have to be just with the environment. This could be with human rights violations. If the government's promoting or not acting upon human rights violations, another country or the organization like the United Nations can place economic sanctions on these countries and basically shame them a little bit. So in Russia, they had economic sanctions placed on them in 2014 by foreign countries protesting the annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. And Iran, we saw slow growth after facing an economic sanction from the United Nations that intended to stop their uranium enrichment program. And these were later lifted. So in response to global market forces, governments do frequently strive to respond to internal demands for domestic reform. They want to be kind of caught up to date with what's going on within the country and the demands of the people. So the United Kingdom, you could argue that Brexit fits this characteristic, as the rise of the United Kingdom Independence Party took place, and they had a high number of supporters that ultimately led to them leaving the European Union. Governments also work to control domestic policy debates and attempt to extend their influence regionally to deflect criticism and improve economic conditions. Criticized governments typically have lower legitimacy, and then economic conditions, if they're prosperous, will raise legitimacy. So NAFTA in Mexico took efforts to improve economic conditions. In Russia, they've also tried to maintain trade relationships and influence with former Soviet countries back when the Soviet Union was still intact. Look at Putin over there. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.